Hi guys, Torgo here with another video for this series. We made a how to choose your class in WoW PvP, but now we are going even more deeper and we give an indication on the roles you might want to have in WoW PvP. Because if you're wanting to play a Retribution Paladin, but you want to be the primary focus of the team, then you might maybe change the class because Retribution Paladins are often not the primary DPS. But I'm going to explain it a bit further in the video. But with those two videos, with a how to choose your class and which role you have whenever you pick that said class or spec, you can have all the cards in your hands and actually decide which spec you're going to play in PvP. Let's start off by saying that it normally never really changes. The design of the classes are pretty much set in stone since Wrath of the Lich King or TBC eras, but things might change, and if they do, I'll update it, of course, with another video or an updated, like a short, brief video about it. This video will focus on 3v3, but I'll talk about RBGs briefly in another video because it seems that this video might be very long. So with that out of the way, let's talk about subcategories of roles you have in WoW PvP, because you have melee, caster DPS, and healing DPS. But if we are talking about melee DPS, you have categories of them as well, since you have primary melee DPS, you have support melee DPS, and you have also your specialists, which I'm going to discuss at the end of the video. In the primary melee DPS category, you will find warriors, demon hunters, you can even say DKs, but mostly unholy DK, and you have your rogues and windwalkers. Those are classes that you mostly need in a 3v3 comp. Of course, if you're running a melee cleave, you will probably have one of those classes into your melee cleave, or in whatever comp you're going for if it's a hybrid melee caster comp. But we are going to discuss it in a future video as well. It is the basic of how you make a comp viable. You want to have a primary DPS, which often results as a catalyst of eliminating people in the arena, and that primary DPS, you have also subcategories of them. You have the brute force, which is the straight brawler melee DPS, which basically is a warrior, a demon hunter, and you can as well put unholy DKs as well. I don't think frost DKs are in that category, but we are going to discuss it a bit further on the line. And you have also the primary DPS that focus on burst timing, setups, and trying to actually set the tempo of the arena. So you have your rogues and windwalkers. And yeah, sometimes it results with a death because they are going for a leg sweep, for example, or they are going for like a kidney shot combo. You can really set the pace at your own will. So obviously, Windwalkers resembles more the warrior than the rogue, how they deal damage, because they don't get the vanish from rogues. But pretty much your one-shot combos are tied to CDs, CCs, and big setups. It's not uncommon that a Windwalker will need a big leg sweep or a other hard CC to land their full combo and kill someone with a swift 4 or 5 button rotation. Whenever you are going to play a primary main DPS as your main class or spec, it will often result in playing either a second primary DPS as an alt or give you the opportunity to play a supporting role, which is the second category of melee DPS. Talking about that supporting role, you have the support melee DPS role. Here you will find the Death Knights, the Red Paladins, enhancement Shamans. And they can either offer group utility, group off healing, or great buffs, or even great off damage. Sometimes they will be super scary for the enemy team. That will result the enemy team to not knowing which one they want to focus. If you're like letting the Retribution Paladin let loose, they might just one-shot your team, for example. They are the second part of a great comp. If you're playing a melee cleave, it often results as a primary DPS with a support melee DPS and a healer of their choice. You can join two primary DPSs together, but often it is hard to join two support melee DPS together, since you will lack the win conditions that the primary DPS can offer. That's why you don't see a Retribution Paladin enhancement Shaman 3v3 comp, because they might have great off healing, but they lack the real setup or the real damage that actually can occur whenever they have like consistent damage, or they lack a mortal strike effect, for example. So that's something that is very important, but whenever you're making a 3v3 comp, because again, let's talk briefly about support melee DPS here. Death Knights are probably the most odd ones of those support DPSs because they have real damage. They have the damage of a primary DPS, but not really as much utility as a red or an enhancement shaman. So why is it a support DPS? DKs were always regarded as support DPS for, let's say, a warrior, for example. In TSG, warrior are actually the class that is shining in a TSG most of the time. Your Frost DK have great utility because of the CC they can provide, for example, and the burst window give enough incentive to CC the DK instead of the warrior whatever it happens. Like, for example, whenever you're disarming someone, you're going to disarm the Frost DK whenever they are going for a pillar go. And you're not going to disarm the warrior, although the warrior does probably the same damage whenever they are going for, but you want to stop that DK. So that's why it's very important to see it as a support DPS. So they will give the win conditions for primary DPS to actually perform even better because they are going to spend a lot of resources on the DK, and you as a warrior, you are going to have a good time. That's why you will see DKs with a DH, for example, or a DK with a warrior, or even DKs with a windwalker. We will talk about comps in 3v3 further down the series, but you will see that even some support melee DPS can become a primary DPS in very specific comps. For example, DK with a boomkin. That's a comp that works. Unholy DKs were always known to be great supports because of their ability to reduce effective healing from the enemy team, especially with healing absorbs. Now, since A-Bomb Limb does a lot of damage and one-shot potential, they can be seen as a primary DPS, but in general, it stays a support DPS. Red and Enhancement Shamans are great off-healers. You have utility burst tied to them, and they are not really known to be great consistent damage dealers. And they need to rely on their teammates to do the big damage outside of cooldowns. They also lack Mortal Strike effects, which is pretty big for a class to actually kill healers, for example. They do have big CC that can result to a win whenever they do it properly. A well-placed hex can turn the tide and make you win games that were maybe not winnable. Now let's talk about casters and ranged DPS in general. This will be more apparent because a lot of caster comps and even hybrid comps, they know that comps with a caster and a melee do it without thinking. The great comps are often with a double primary caster DPS or with a primary caster paired with a support DPS. Primary casters are often the hardest casters to play, that need attention and to be mained to play correctly. That's why you don't see often warlocks alting mages, for example, or you don't see a lot of mages as an alt. You want to main them to actually perform well on them. So often you won't play two primary casters, and you will have to decide which one you're going to main and let the other class for other people to play. The primary classes are warlocks and mages. How many warlocks do you know that also alt a mage seriously? Vice versa is also really rare. It can happen, but it will be less likely than, for example, a warrior alting a windwalker monk. They are primary classes because they are more difficult to play and need a mastery of that class to perform well. If they want to alt, they might give a shot towards a melee, a healer, or even now the second category of classes, which are the supporting caster DPS. Support caster DPSs are like, for example, elemental shamans, balanced druids, and shadow priests. They are the specs that enable the primary DPS to go hard. Sometimes it does feel like they are primary classes since the real ones do focused most are actually focused most of the time. Like for example, warlocks and mages are often kill on sight. All the three specs offer great off healing, great CC, and great utility. A well placed root beam can solo win you the game, or an elemental shaman using their totems and also instant burst to turn the tide. Your Shadow Priest being the ideal utility spec, which can result of having an easier game whenever you're playing with one. They often also pair well with a primary melee DPS. Like remember Ailey Shamans playing with a warrior, which is Thundercleave, or even a balanced druid playing with a demon hunter, which is still popular these days. Those are all insane comps to play in, and as a support caster DPS, you will have the luxury to actually choose the comps that you want to play in. Again, reminder, we are going to cover the comps in a later video. So now let's talk briefly about the elephant in the room. I didn't talk about feral druids, nor hunters. And those are for me your specialists. They are often best played with with either another specialist, like for example jungle cleave, or they are played with a primary DPS, like for example thug or kitty cleave. Those are classes that are hard to combine with other classes because their gameplay and style isn't transferable towards another class or spec. That's why you don't see a lot of ferals actually mm, playing other classes. Of course, this is not a which classes do you need to alt, but you need to have an idea on which class you're going to main so you know if you're going to alt further down the line or not. You can combine with any spec that you want, but you will have to learn the spec on a different way. How a DH and a warrior operate is vastly closer than how a feral druid will learn to play rogue, for example. Those are actually two different worlds, and surely you can do that. But it will be vastly harder to perform on those two specs. That's why people that main jungle cleaves really only stay in their lanes, and hunters, for example, do have more choices comp-wise, but also role-wise. You can play three specs. One is very bursty, which is marksmanship hunter, and two are more setup-based, more methodical, which is BM and survival, but you can really decide your role based on specs. If you want to do a lot of damage and being more boom boom boom, you will go for marksmanship hunters. If you want to play more methodical, more in a setup based comp, then I would suggest to play BM and suggest to play survival. Those are classes that are really role defining, for example, playing for the CC game. You're going to intimidate the pet. You're going to pet stun, for example, and then trap, or you're going to go near the healer and actually trap them whenever they are rooted or snared. So you have a lot of possibilities whenever you're playing the specialist specs. Same for ferals, to be honest. You have like so many options to have like a easy time to do damage, but also a harder time whenever you want to do damage. It depends about the comps that you're playing. You can play more like a brawler, or you can even play more like a setup-based melee. So you want to search for stuns, you want to stun lock the whole team, for example, cyclone, and then go back to bursting. Or you're going to play in their faces and all the time pump. So those are the options that you have as a feral druid. Alright, we are discussing about healers right now. I didn't forget about you because there is a lot of difference between healers. I'm going to say that there are like two categories of healers. You can make an extra if you want, but for me there are like two categories. You have the one that needs to be mained and the ones that are actually picked up fairly easy because of the simplicity of healing on those specs. For example, a main healer spec would be something like a resto druid, a disc priest, and a resto shaman. Those three specs with a lot of things, like those three specs have a lot of things going on for them. A resto druid need to know exactly which hearts are on with and on which target they're on. But also they need to know how to CC properly without getting countered, because whenever you're going melee to get a cyclone, that's also the opportunity for the enemy healer to actually CC you. So you want to know whenever you're going in and whenever you're going to be max ranged. But also, you're using utility CDs and defensive CDs at the right time. All of this combined with mobility and positioning, which is super important for a resto druid. The difference between a main resto druid and one that plays it occasionally is really big. I would suggest watching markers on Twitch or on YouTube so you have an idea on what a resto druid requires to do to perform. He will make it seem like it's easy, but in reality it's hard to translate it in game. Disc and resto shamans are healers that need to weave damage in. They are aggressive healers, and the more aggressive the healer is, the more you will need to learn to play with them. And combine the damage and the healing aspect of those two healers are really a tough job. And that's why those are for me main healer specs. So if you're going to main a healer, it is easier to start maining a resto druid, a disc, and a resto shaman because it translates a bit easier on the other healers. But you have the second category, which is the not so hard healing specs. To be honest, everything is nuanced. But you have holy priests, holy paladins, and mistweaver monks. Now, I'm going to explain why I mean what I mean with not so hard, because they are frankly great at healing. They are less focused on dealing damage, although holy priests can do a lot of damage, but that's not their like main job. Their main job is utility, CC, and CDs that they have and actually throw out. Holy priests are notoriously known to be starter healing specs. If you don't know how to heal, it is the best to learn with them because you know that you have great healing abilities, you have great CC, you have great damage, you have great opportunities to run away, to soak damage in, and also just fly up, for example. Obviously, at the moment they are S tier, so it also is an easier healing spec to begin with. So it really doesn't matter if you play a not so hard healing spec or not, because it is not tied to power. But it does translate it in game where a holy priest can make much more mistakes, for example, and still win the game, while a mistake on a disc priest, a resto shaman, or a druid will result you to a loss, or even a hard match to win. Holy paladins are easier to play because they have like utilities to spare. You have like, for example, two buffs, divine shield, a wall, ultimate sacrifice, big AoE healing. You can even have aura mastery. You can also have a AoE damage, like a AoE wall to the whole party. You have a lot of utility and you just need to learn how to use that utility. But you also have big AoE healing. Like for example, we are talking about AoE lay on hands. That's how it feels whenever he is healing and he's healing the whole party. It feels like they are like full health all the time. You have some great one button damage spells that can result in a TKO, for example. And mistweaver on the other hand, they generally just heal, position themselves, try to CC whenever they can, although it's very difficult. Sometimes they just don't CC, they just CC whenever the healer comes to them. They have great CDs to prevent the enemy team to obliterate your team, and really, I would say that it is the ideal healer to heal in a caster cleave, since you will probably not be the focus, nor the focus of the interrupt and silences. Easier healers don't mean that they are god tier, but they do mean that they need less to happen to become a god tier. Like, remember Mistweavers at BFA? Doesn't seem like it is very different from now, but they got like a buff and now they got nerfed in Shadowlands. Just a few buffs can make a healer just tip over the edge and become S tier. And it all becomes about the meta. So this marks the end of the video. Now you know what class does what, in what role they are played in, and also you have a broad idea on what you can expect on those specs and classes. This series will have everything discussed, and the next video we will talk about RBGs, but more in depth. So you will have a broader view on each spec, what is actually happening to those specs in RBGs, what do they need to do to perform in RBGs, and really have a better idea if you want to actually grind RBGs, which spec you want to play and in what role you want to play. Of course, this is not an indication of the reality sometimes. If you want to play a primary DPS and you feel like Retribution Paladin is your primary DPS, then go for it. But you will lack the Mortal Strike effect, you will lack the mobility, you will lack the rush down effect, you will lack the setup based, because Retribution is not a setup based class. So you will lack a lot of things to make you a primary DPS. But you can do whatever you want, and that's the beauty of World of Warcraft PvP. So thank you for watching the video, thank you for the support, and of course like the video if you liked the video. Comment below what you think about the video, it helps me a lot. Did it help you or not? Was it interesting? Let me know it. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. Follow my Twitch channel, which is found in the description below, and of course, you will find the whole playlist on my channel, because this is a series. I know that some people will probably miss a video or two, but the playlist will be up so you can always watch it in one go if you so desire. Be safe, and of course, we will see each other very soon. Tomorrow, maybe with a new video, and we will see, of course, if you're learning something new or not. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Ciao.